know something interesting is sure to happen. Well, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Mr. Rabbit, then why did you ask the question?
Goodness, this is quite extraordinary.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
But today is turning into the most curious adventure I have ever had.
Welcome to the Alice in Wonderland podcast. I'm Georgia Alice, and thank you again for joining us as we tumble down yet another rabbit hole together. So I have with me the founder of professional company LimeHorse, Sara Robertson. So after experiencing severe burnout in her former career in management at one of Canada's 50 best managed companies, Sara went on a mission to build a new life for herself and found a calling in teaching others that there is a better way to live and work. LimeHorse focuses on the legal profession and offers online and in-person training in mindfulness, emotional intelligence, organizational development, and peak performance. Sara is also a faculty and advisory board member of University of Toronto's Applied Mindfulness Meditation program. She's the co-chair of the Ontario chapter and continuing legal education planning task force member with the Mindfulness in Law Society and performance specialist at Mindful Gateway Consulting. My goodness, there's a mouthful there. She is a regular contributor on Thrive Global's special section on overcoming lawyer burnout. She has worked in diverse environments such as academic, corporate, and professional sports, having developed and delivered training for the Toronto Maple Leafs for their development camp and the Toronto Marlies. Sara is passionate about helping professionals build resilience and cultivate purposeful work. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, Georgia. How are you?
I'm amazing, thank you. I'm so excited to have you. And before we hit record, we were already starting to go down some amazing rabbit holes. I said, we've got to stop. We've got to stop. We've got to record these gems and pieces of pearls of wisdom that you're sharing. So I have a question, Sara, that I ask all of my guests on the podcast as a way for us to, see where this conversation is going to take us. And in the theme of Alice in Wonderland, my question is quite a simple question. I want you to imagine that I am a 7-year-old Alice making my way through Wonderland, and I bump into you. And I say, Sara, who are you? What do you do? Why are you in Wonderland? What's your purpose here? How would you explain your purpose and what you're doing in this world to a 7-year-old child?
Oh, geez. Well, I think the first thing I would say is, Alice, I'm an awful lot like you. I myself am, a little girl trying to find her way through a, big unknown world. And I have a secret for you. Everybody else is pretty much the same. We're all trying to find our way through a big unknown world. And I feel my purpose is to do the very best that I can to help others find their way or join me on this journey through this world with the things that I've learned. And, one thing that I have learned is that we often tell ourselves stories that influence how we experience this world. And the quality of our stories is indicative of the quality of our experience. And so what I help people do is understand what their stories are and how that impacts how they experience their world, and then help them find tools to change their story if they need to make their experience in this world a little bit more enjoyable, more in alignment with their values, more in alignment with how they want to be in this world with others, and so that they can experience fulfillment.
Beautiful. And I love what you said there around the stories we tell ourselves, because just recently, actually, I put a post on social media about the assumptions we make and how we create these stories and we believe them to be the truth. And in fact, it's not. They're these made up stories that we do have the ability to change. So I want to just to dive back a little bit around your story,
Mhm.
your real life story. Don't know what you've told yourself about it, but in your bio, we talk about you moving from being in an organizational management role
Mhm.
and suffering from burnout. So what were the stories you were telling yourself that would have kept you there and kept you to got you to a point where burnout the became the effect of that?
Um, well, I guess to give it like I think it makes sense to go through just like a very brief history of what was happening in my life at that time. So, interestingly, I actually had gone to college first time around I did a diploma in fashion design, which is completely unrelated to what I was doing with work at that time. And I moved into that career after I had had my daughter, and a lot of things changed in my life. I moved into that career because it was um, unsustainable to be in the profession that I was in. There were some things around, taking care of a family and finances and that sort of thing that came up. And the story that I had told myself was that if I had this position, that would take care of the basic needs part of it, and that then again things would be okay. And I found that a combination of things that were happening at that time. I had a young child. I went through divorce. I had this job that was very demanding, and not a lot of tools to manage myself. I didn't have particularly strong skills in self-regulation, very much externally motivated. So a lot of the stories that I told myself was that my value was reflected in other people's opinion of me was. And so I very much felt like I a lot of the stories were things like a lot of shoulds. I should be doing this. I have to be doing this. Um, I was very much stuck between being at work and taking care of my child. And it was one of those situations that I think a lot of parents can probably relate to, where there's this pull between looking like you're invested in work and being invested as a parent, and they tend to conflict with each other a lot. And for me, it really felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel with it. The stories that I told myself about what I needed to be doing created this scenario where I very much felt like I was failing at everything all the time. And it felt like I was failing at everything all the time, and that there was no end to it. It was not, a difficult period of time. It was like the forever rest of my future is going to be this sort of uh, stress and general feeling of not being good enough. And I decided that a really good way to deal with that would be to use alcohol to avoid life in general. And as happens with these sorts of things, that became it at the beginning. It was a good escape and became its own problem. And so in 2013, I found myself as an unemployed, alcohol addicted single mother, which when I was Alice's age was not on my list of things that I would like to do with the rest of my life. Um, I don't think anybody sits there when they're younger and someone says, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up?" That was not on my list. And so here I found myself in this place at the time. It was incredibly difficult at the time. I can look back on it now and see it as a blessing, in the sense that I'm one of those people that I seem to learn best through lots of suffering. I'm a little stubborn in that sense, where I have to feel a lot of pain before I'm willing to make change. Um, I'm trying to learn more through grace. We'll see how that goes. But the I can look at it now and see that moment in time as a blessing, because I had no choice but to change, but to open myself up to something different. I mean, you can't go. I burnt all the bridges. There was no going back, because I burnt them all on the way out. So um, I initially got into practicing mindfulness because I was in addition to getting into recovery from the alcohol dependence. I got into mindfulness because I was like, there has to be some way to deal with to do something with the way that I feel inside. Like the anxiety was incredible. And I mean, just the act of for anybody who's had knows someone or who has had issues with substances, the stopping is the easy part. Staying stopped is the hard part, because then it's all of those things that, drive that substance use in the first place that bubble up. And so I found myself in the program at the University of Toronto that I teach in now, trying to find some tools for myself. And it felt very much like we described, like Alice walking through Wonderland, where I'm like, who are these people and what is this place and what is this strange thing that they're doing? And they want me to do what? And that's supposed to help how? And because I was I had gr- grown up or lived in this environment where the stories were, you must be doing, you must be achieving, you must be all of, you are only as good as the way that, what you're accomplishing, that you don't receive love, you get love, like you work for it, you do things for it. And so this it was just a really kind of turning like the entire narrative that I had about how life was to be on its head. And so as strange as that experience was, getting into it, I did feel better. And so I kept going, and it just turned into, sort of transformed my life in this way. And I looked at it at that time in particular. It's changed, changing quite a bit now, but getting into sort of mindset and mindfulness based trainings in general were much more as sort of an intervention at the time. So you're seeing more of it in kind of like recovery settings, education, healthcare, that sort of thing. Mindfulness hadn't really made its way into the sort of performance area at that time. And I was sort of sitting there saying, I don't know, Georgia, if things would have been different. It's not like I didn't want to go back to the career that I had before, but I was like, wow, maybe if I had had these tools, I would have been in a different place, or perhaps the collateral damage wouldn't have been so extreme. And so that sort of lit this fire in me to say, like, wow, like, wouldn't it be wonderful if, people didn't have to go through what I went through to experience this transformation. And I always get asked why lawyers, because I'm not a lawyer. So an interesting thing is when you get into recovery, you meet a whole lot of lawyers, because there's a lot of lawyers that are, and that's a significant issue for that profession, really across the Western world in particular. And so I just that's a part of my story where I was open to what the universe was going to bring me, as what my purpose was going to be or what my vocation was going to be. And I didn't wake up one day and go, oh, lawyers. Like, it was a rolling thing where it just kind of kept like, I don't know if you've seen maybe a like slapstick or comedy video where someone's walking down the street and things just keep like coming out of and hitting them in the face. Like, that's what it felt like. Was just like, okay, this is just absurd now. Like, so I made the decision to move into that, to go forward with that as far as my profession. And I continue to do work with the University of Toronto. And a lot of the things that we talk about are, how do you look at the world? What are the stories that you tell yourself? How is that helpful? Like, what and even having the cognitive flexibility to be able to not attach yourself to any story necessarily in particular. So
So
um
I have a question for you. So thank you so
yeah.
much for sharing your story and the narrative that got you to where you are today. Amazing and very inspiring for anyone out there who's thinking, maybe I'm burnout and relating to what you're saying. When we think back and when I hear you talk about, all these shoulds that you were sort of living up to and the stories there, and I love what you just finished off saying there is that, you can actually continually just change and be agile with your narratives. But do you now have a different narrative that helps counteract that, oh, I should do this, or I should be doing that, or I need to be a people pleaser, I'm not good enough? Is there a new narrative that has sort of become a mantra for you, or a go-to that's helping you to do what you do now and be able to help, the people, the lawyers, the athletes, and so forth?
Um, yeah, I think one of the shifts that I've made, because there was a lot of perfectionism that was going on for me as well. And so I do find that, one of the best antidotes to judgment is curiosity. So I do try and, and I have certainly have moments where I'm like, oh, there's that old thing, that old story again. Like it's not like I've had some complete, psychic transformation, and I don't feel self judgment or judgment of others, and that sort of thing. And I mean, part of practicing, a mindful stance towards things is not the elimination of anything, it's the awareness of it. So we're like, oh, I feel that I'm being judgmental right now, and is that how I want to be, and that sort of thing. And but most of the time, the mantra is really along the lines of just like, oh, this is how things are right now. And um and allowing a lot, there's a lot of allowing, a lot of this is how things are right now. I mean, I certainly do. um I mean, the type of, the work that I do and the things that I'm up to. So I certainly don't short myself on intentions or, moving towards, achievements for myself. It's not an idea that I've let go of things, that I'm sort of floating around in space, not doing anything. But I think the way that I relate to the things that I do has changed a lot. Like it's more of a, uh, this is what I do, as opposed to this is what I am.
Mhm.
um that's been a significant change for me. But I do, in general, just letting go of resistance has been a transformational practice for me. Like I said, just even this is how things are right now. And if anything, the ability to the ability to gain a meta awareness of yourself operating within your life has been one of the greatest tools that I've been able to have. Is to have, for Sarah to see Sarah in her interactions, whereas before it was very much more automatically driven. um and uh and I think it just gaining a confidence in we talked about this before we started recording, around like, what am I made of? And I've changed from feeling like I had a need to find external validation to a belief that no matter what happens, I will be okay.
Yeah, and that's something that I think can help us all, because we were talking about that previously. That's something that I sort of personally took into 2020, and it sounds like you have as well. One of the things, that you mentioned a little bit earlier was around mindfulness and mindset. So in the work I do, I work in the mindset space, not the mindfulness space.
Mhm.
And when I talk to people about what I do, they think automatically that I'm talking about mindfulness. Oh, you come in and do meditations. No, I don't. So could you, in your own words, sort of help people understand what the difference is, because you work in both spaces? So how would people understand if they're looking for something that's going to help them? How would mindset, information, training, education help them? And then from mindfulness, where does that fit in?
Okay, so this is going to be interesting because I'll unpack like meditation, mindfulness, and mindset, because mindfulness and meditation tend to get smushed together too. And think it doesn't necessarily do a service to either of them. So if you can look at it as, meditation is a mindfulness practice, right? So mindfulness being the skill, you can have a mindfulness practice, but mindfulness in general is sort of like an umbrella term for, like, let's say you were going to have um exercise or something like that, and there's all different types of things that you can do to get exercise. And mindfulness is a similar, in it to a certain degree, in a similar way. Like if you wanted to talk about, say, mindfulness maybe being a way to exercise your brain or exercise your spiritual self or something like that, meditation being like the practice or activity of mindfulness. And one of the core, so if you look at mindfulness training, there's a 3A model of it, which brings in sort of awareness, acceptance, and action. And so awareness is the part where you're in the present moment, being aware of what's happening. Accurate assessment is important to so really cultivating self-awareness or awareness of the situation in general. And then there's acceptance. So you can be aware of a situation, but not be willing to accept the reality of it, or at least what your reality of it is. And then once you reach acceptance and you get to a place where there can be action. And I see mindset as the more falling into the action category. So, you're saying like, okay, I've got, and it can transverse over acceptance a little bit too, but I don't think that you can get to mindset without the awareness um part. So that's where I think mindfulness benefits mindset in the sense um of contributing to, that increasing awareness and accurate self-assessment, and then being able to take, the information that you get out of that, and being able to apply that into the mindset work.
Yeah, and that takes us back to something you mentioned earlier around the metacognition. So Sarah noticing Sarah. So that is something that I believe metacognition is our superpower, and so many people don't use it
Mhm.
because you have this power in a moment, in a split second, to notice your thoughts, notice your actions, and change them just like that.
Yeah.
And I think that comes with the awareness of that you can do that is the start of
Yeah.
it as well. And that brings us back to the awareness. So it brings us back to your AAA, and then acceptance. Okay, I'm in this moment. I'm doing this. I accept it.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to switch and change action if I need to or
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's another one that I find, particularly when you're dealing with high performers, and because there is a lot of doing that happens in high performance, that they're like, "Oh, so I have to change this." And it's like, "No, no, you don't necessarily have to change anything." Like, the part of the acceptance may be that you're exactly where you need to be, or maybe it's that it's something that's outside of your locus of control, and that you're trying to, make change with something that is not, not that you don't have within your agency to do, which happens a lot. I used to do it all the time. I occasionally still do, and and often causes me distress when I try that. But helping people, yeah, understand that, just because, you're doing this awareness piece and stuff, that doesn't always mean that something needs to change. It doesn't always mean more either. Sometimes it can mean less. And but that awareness and acceptance is kind of what allows you to have that accurate view of, your own reality, or to be able to tinker with it. Like, I think what you're talking about too is you're saying like we can change our thoughts in an instant, and it's like, if you don't have that metacognition or that awareness, then you don't have the ability to do that tinkering, to be like, oh, you know what, that one's not really working here, so maybe like we'll take this one out, and like let's try this one. Um and I think like foundationally, that's what mindfulness allows for, is to be able to sort of cultivate the way of being, or the skills that then lead into having that ability to almost design, like, we can almost design our own realities. And I know that this is, an area that you get into too, with a lot of the mindset work, that um there's so much that happens in the world that is outside of our um direct control. But when we can have that sense of awareness or metacognition, and we can shift ourselves into our own locus of control, there's incredible power in what we can do with the things that we do have agency
Yeah.
over.
I love that. And I love that you've used the word tinkering, because that it means I'm playing, I'm having a bit of fun, I'm experimenting, and I'm not really attached to the outcome. It's an experiment. Tinkering is a
Yes.
very playful way of looking at it, and that gives us permission to try things.
Hmm.
And as you said too, and I love that you also really were really clear that that awareness piece and stopping and paying attention and noticing is doesn't mean you have to change anything whatsoever. And one of the things that one of my earlier mentors had mentioned, which is I think aligned to what you're talking about just now, is that when we don't have that metacognition, where we're run by the subconscious program, the deep-seated mindset that we have, and obviously we just keep living the same life, getting the same results, nothing's happening, and therefore it's just reacting to the world around us, constantly in reaction mode. Whereas that ability that you've spoken about to notice the thoughts, the actions, what's going on, is a response. And it's like hitting the pause button and going, okay, where am I? I'm accepting where I am right now. Working for me, not working for me.
Mhm.
Working for me, cool. Move forward, take action. Not working, cool. Make a change, move
Mhm.
forward. So that response is just a slower level of awareness before we move forward. And you're right, we do get to design our life, because we're changing in that moment. If we want to, we can change the narrative of how we're
Mhm.
viewing that world. So there's a lot of gifts and a lot of gold, and I really want people to listen to this podcast more than once.
Well,
Sarah's
and
dropping gold here.
well, and I think the other thing too, I find in my, my personal experience and my experience teaching others is because we do live in such an instant gratification society too. We want a quick solution, and realizing that, sometimes acceptance it can be a long road, and um it's I you're I will speak from experience. I say you're never ready. You're not ready until you're ready. That's how it is. So that's another stance I take with life. Like I said, this is how things are right now, is, allowing information to come in and and trusting that I will get what I need when I'm ready for it. I went through a period, maybe about a year and a half ago. I think it might have been, yeah, because it was after we had met and you and I had a chat, because I was kind of like wrestling with some things with my business that I was unsure about. And I would wake up every morning, I would do my practice, and I would just kind of open myself up to um, what I needed to move forward with. And it took like a solid it took us like 7 months before I was like, oh, okay, this is what I want to do. This makes sense for me with this next piece. And I think having patience for the process
Mm,
is probably one of the more challenging parts of, transformational work. Is sure, some people have an sometimes, like, there are some things that just drop out of the sky and you're like, that's it, the like eureka or whatever kind of word you want to use. But 99% of my experience has been that it's a lot of walking through the fog,
yeah.
staying open, paying attention, trusting myself, but being curious and having fun with it along the way. And, even trying to have fun with your failures, in the sense of like, oh, I tried that thing and it didn't work. So what now? Because it is so easy when, especially if you're on an entrepreneurial journey where, I've gone through periods where I feel like, I don't know if you guys have in Australia. Did you ever have those blow up clown things that you could punch and they would keep
Yes.
coming back
They
up?
keep
Yeah,
coming
I've
back
had,
in.
yeah, they keep coming back in, and I've had some times where I felt like that's what my life was like, where it's just like, "Okay, we'll just keeping the hits and get back taking the hits and get back up," and I've always, like, through the journey of being able to have that metacognition and be self-reflective, look at periods of time that were hard or that I thought didn't have value, or, why did that have to happen? And in retrospect, because as you say, hindsight's 2020, be like, oh wow, okay, that makes sense now. I understand, why I needed that, or how that information is useful now. And, trying to just keep yourself open to life as a process. I think we spend a lot of time trying to treat things in life as a journey towards a destination, and the part of the practice of being mindful is, and being in the moment, is realizing that life is, it's all journey.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's a really beautiful piece of gold there that you had around hindsight being 2020. If more of us understood that, when we're in the moment and feeling confused, feeling uncertain, if we can just know that with patient persistence, like moving forward
Mhm.
patiently, what's happening now will be hindsight in a week, a month, 7 months, and you'll know what it means. So it's about knowing that, okay, I'm going to accept that what's happening here right now is something that will benefit me in the future in some way. I'll be able to find the good in it. Doesn't feel like it right now, feels terribly uncomfortable. And we were talking before we hit record around both of us have been through divorces. And I can remember going through that over a long period of time. And absolutely, like, it was horrid. It was horrible experience. The whole thing. I can see you nodding there. Yep.
Yeah,
Um,
it's no fun.
not fun at all. However, fast forward 3 years, it was the best thing that ever happened in my life.
Yeah.
But I couldn't see it while I was in it. And I think the gift that you're giving people here is around understanding that accept what you're in, but know it will have a purpose, but you won't see that purpose until you can look back on it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I wouldn't, if given the option to go back to my life before, you know, uh, alcohol dependence and that sort of thing, like, even if people will ask me sometimes, like, so this getting back onto that track a little bit, but people ask me, they're like, oh, you know, do you wish you could go back to before it was a problem? And I was like, no, like, I wasn't happy, like, or I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't enjoying life, or, that, so I can look at that and say, like, it was, I guess, if you like I said, if I had a cat, I wouldn't have chosen that to be, what would happen to me when I grow up, or, if they had a catalog of, like, here's the way to your spiritual awakening, like, I think I would
Which
have
one do
tried.
you want?
Yeah, I would have been like, oh, look, can't I go spend a year at an ashram or something like that? Like, does it have to be this one? But that's what I got. And so, like, with anything with life, it's like, that's what this is what I got. What am I gonna, what am I gonna do with it? And the um things that have happened in my life as a result of that experience moving forward, I wouldn't trade for the world. Like, I yes, of course, if I could change some of the harm that was done, some of the collateral damage of having an experience like that with other people that I love and care about, I wouldn't be like, oh, it's great that I hurt people in this way, because that's what happens when you're dealing with addiction issues. But given the changes that have happened in my life and what I've been able to give back to people as a result, you know, I I don't I don't ever want to say that I don't have regrets, because I think that um regrets are important in the sense of being able to learn. I don't feel ashamed about that anymore. And I think, you know, like you said, being able to look at your difficulties in life as um, part of what makes you you is, it's, again, same thing, like those stories, those narratives, like, what do you tell yourself about that experience? Because you could say, oh, I'm Georgia the divorcee, I'm damaged goods, I'm this, that, or the other. Or you could say, like, wow, look at, that was a really difficult experience, but look at how strong it made me. Or, you know look at how I can, relate to other people who are going through that experience. And so all of these things, like, I just, everything in life, every second of life, I think, is an opportunity to, sort of, mine for gold in a way. And one of the things, like, you were talking about, like, the confusion and hindsight being 2020. But I think, like, if you want to look at it the other way and say, like, I mean, if you knew everything that was going to happen in the future, like, how boring would life be?
I know.
You want to know, someone's like, oh, do you wish that, like, what if you could have like, would you ever want to have a crystal ball? No, I wouldn't. I don't want to know. Like, that
I'd
doesn't
rather
appeal.
create and have fun and experiment.
Exactly. That doesn't appeal to me in the least,
Yeah.
to know what's going to happen. And so, and also, since we can't know what's going to happen, part of the freedom I found in the work that I do is I stopped trying to figure out what's going to happen. So,
That's a really beautiful acceptance and surrender to life, isn't it? But not surrendering, as you said before, and allowing life to happen to you. You mentioned at the start, you still have intentions, you still have things you're moving towards, but you almost sound like you're surrendering to the process of how it will
yeah.
unfold and the journey, but still owning that with your own agency and sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it gets a little, messy when we get into semantics and stuff around acceptance and how people feel about that. And I think that it tends to get bundled with this idea of resignation
Mm.
a lot. And it's not. Acceptance is that piece where it gives you the clarity to be able to move into action. Resignation is just letting things happen to you. So, and they're very different. Like acceptance is an incredibly powerful stance to be in. It means you're not fighting against things, that you're not fighting losing battles anymore when you're in, in acceptance. Resignation is something that's quite different, but I do, I get the sense that delineating those two from each other is tends to be a challenge along the journey of this type of work, is understanding that, acceptance is actually extremely powerful, but uncoupling it from that, this idea of resignation, particularly in our sort of hyper individualistic society, that can be, that can take some time for people to unpack.
Yeah. Couple of things. First of all, when you're talking just shortly ago, you mentioned, going through the divorce, and you mentioned, we could look at it at being broken and not good enough, and all that was me for probably the first 6 months. No one's going to love me again. No one's going to want me again, until I accepted and took action and moved forward and just became a strong, confident woman because of it. So really love that you mentioned that. And I just want to make sure, want to highlight that so people can know that you can move through this, or anything that comes through, and it does take acceptance. The second thing was that really piqued my interest is you mentioned that you no longer feel shame around, or shamefulness, I think it was, around the alcohol dependency. So I'm really curious around, how did you move? Because that's a big thing to move away from, shame. So was there anything that helped you to navigate out of feeling shame for it, but seeing it now as, I guess, a blessing and just part of the journey?
Um, I mean, it's been 6 years now. So I said got into recovery in 2013, and it took a couple years I did a few laps around 6 months in order for it to sort of stick for me. So, I mean, that's another thing too, as part of this message, is that, you know, um, not everything works out the first time, and that's okay. Continuing, if something's important to you, just to keep trying. And I think the shame piece took some time. It did. It's been, I would say it was definitely a few years before that kind of started to lift. But a lot of it came out of really understanding where that came, like what came from, like where that behavior came from, the motivation behind it, what was happening in my life at the time. Realizing that I was a person who was struggling with something that I didn't know how to deal with, and that was the best tool that I had in my toolbox at the time.
Yeah.
And it was, um like I said, I certainly have regrets, because there are things that I did that I'm not proud of. But as far as, looking at the shame piece too, it is that difference between looking at the behavior as being problematic and looking at me as being problematic. And so I think as I started to separate the behavior that had happened during that time from the person that I was able to look at it, um, differently. And I will tell you now, like I've had some conversations with, like, I'm still very involved in my recovery community, and I've had some conversations with people because I do sponsor other individuals. That's been a big thing, is going back and like helping people who are where I was years ago to, hopefully find their way to recovery. And I've had this conversation, and I've said it's the strangest experience, because it's almost like a different self. Like I can look back at, I can reflect on things that I remember doing. And it's almost like watching someone else.
Mhm.
Like I know that it was me, but it's like there's no emotional connection to it. It literally is like, who was that person? And it's the oddest experience to go through, because, and I don't know if you've ever had any kind of experience like this, of kind of a separate, feeling like a separate self. But one of the things that has come out of that, of being in a place where I'm like, oh, I don't feel the shame anymore, like that emotion is gone from it. And I can reflect on, when I reflect on those experiences, like I said, it feels like a different person doing it, but I can also look back and be like, wow, I was so sick.
Mm.
And it allows me, because it allows me to look at that experience and really reflect on it, being like how, how unwell I was. And so being able to separate myself, me as a human being, from the behavior at that time. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, like, we're always evolving, where I'm going to be a different person tomorrow than I was today, because we're always, integrating new information and new practices and stuff like that. So, like, today, Sarah can look at, 6, 8, 10 years ago Sarah and be like, wow, she was really suffering.
Mm. Yeah, and that's a beautiful piece. And I think it's called a refractory period, as in how long it takes for, you to experience a traumatic or an emotional event to the point where you can look back at it and there's no emotional charge anymore.
Yeah.
And I think back to your mindfulness practices, and the mindfulness piece is that allows us, hopefully over time, to be able to shorten that refractory period as
Mhm.
traumas or emotional upsets happen. That how long does it take you? And I'm guessing that somebody that's practicing like you are now, you probably have a very short refractory period for things that might happen to you day to day, because
I
you've
do.
done a lot of training and work around that.
Yeah, so things that thing, and that's one of, like you said, one of the benefits that comes out of these sorts of practices, or even with mindset and that sort of thing, is the recovery period, or the refractory period is so low, and then like your recovery is so quick. And they do say, like, with people who are long term, mindfulness practitioners, it's not that they experience less stress, it's that they recover from it more quickly. Like, my people who are mindful don't not have bad things happen to them, or they don't not experience stress, but their relationship to that stress has changed. And so they're able to bring themselves out of that, and move forward or reframe it much more quickly than somebody who, hasn't done that sort of training. um and yeah, you hit the nail right on the head with that, where like the emotional charge, and that would take us into something too, talking about like benefits of the type of work that you and I are doing, is around emotional regulation and self-regulation, and how important that is, like how important being able to not necessarily remove the charge all the time, because we don't want to be emotionless automatons. That's not the point. But having a emotional reaction that is proportionate to the experience is really important, being able to regulate that. And there are, lots of different things that go into that, both physical, having a really good sense of your body is important. I know we've talked through some of our flow training about interoception and how important that is. And I think, one of the tools that really got me through that difficult time, and that I use so much now too, is around physical state change as well, like being able to bring my body down when it feel like, being able to um, sort of change levels of arousal in my body, depending on what it is that I want to do. Sometimes I want to be more activated, sometimes I want to be less activated. And through those sorts of practices, awareness of the body, awareness of the thoughts, all this metacognition gives you that power to be able to change your state to be most effective in whatever environment or situation that you find yourself in.
And I love that. And I think this is a really nice way to sort of round out the conversation too, is that when we have these tools, we can have that emotional charge, but we can also have the ability, using metacognition, noticing it in the moment, accepting it, and then using the tools to then bring our state to a place that's going to be what we need in that moment. So quick example might be having an argument with a partner, noticing yourself there, noticing how you're feeling, accepting that this is the way it is, feeling the emotional charge, maybe doing some breath or something to bring you back to a state where you now are responding to your partner instead of this
Mhm.
emotional reaction that might not do any service to the relationship. So I think there are, yeah, really great tools. You've got bucket loads of tools. So how will people find you and get hold of you if what you've been talking about and the work you do has piqued their interest and they would love to reach out to you, work with you, or do one of your programs? How do they find you?
Yeah, so my website is www.limehorse.com. And you could also get me directly at Sara, Sara, at limehorse.com, which is a lot better than going through my general mailbox on my website, because that one doesn't get it. I check it fairly regularly, but it's not as direct of a line as going straight to my email. And yeah, if you're in the legal profession or know someone in the legal profession, then I do have online courses that are available. I do independent workshops and coaching that is not strictly aligned with the legal profession. It's just my website in general is not is more tailored towards the law portion of my work. And yeah, and I do actually have a course coming up doing another program through University of Toronto that's online now, coming up in February. So if I don't have the dates memorized off the top of my head, but if someone was interested in doing some more of work around the types of conversations that we're having, there's a 4-week, it's 2 hours per week program through the University of Toronto that you can sign up for. And if you wanted to email me directly, I'd be happy to convey that information.
Perfect. Awesome. So if you've felt connected to Sarah's story and what the work she's doing, please reach out to her. She's an amazing human being doing incredible work in this world. So Sarah, as we finish up, is there any just final piece of wisdom or something you'd like to share to leave our listeners with that's going to, help them walk into 2021 and, have create a great year for themselves?
I think, expecting the unexpected is a good way to live if we've learned anything from last year. I'll tell you just a kind of funny story to end this off is I try to pick sort of a word of the year in the new year that I want for my coming year. And last year I picked growth. And yeah, you're laughing because it didn't quite show up in the package that I was envisioning. So maybe it's be careful what you ask for and, stay open to what you receive. But just to moving into the year, like really coming from a place of understanding that, we're as humans, like we're so adaptable, we're so resilient. We have so much power in our ability to create an incredible life for ourselves. But it's an inside job. So, yeah.
Wise words there. Thank you so much. It's been a delight chatting with you. And yeah, we'll hopefully catch you soon and looking forward to seeing who shows up for your course in February. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Great. Thanks, Georgia.
Today is turning into the most curious adventure I've ever had.